Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phil and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cam, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, we got a great episode ahead. We're going to talk about the Dominion Fox News suit. Fox appears to have settled for something. We've got a ton of news still swirling around that. An abortion pill ruling out of Texas that made its way to the Supreme Court, but no decisiveness there. A debt ceiling fight is heating up in Congress, and then we'll talk about stuff including candidates running for office in 2024. Cam, over to you to get us started.
All right, so you mentioned it. We'll start off with Dominion and Fox. All right, that's been all over the news, and we have talked about this before. But this past week, on Tuesday, it was settled outside of court for what I hear was $787.5 million. An awful lot of money there, no matter how you slice it. So, no effect to daily operations at Fox per se, but Phil, that's a lot of money. I mean, they did avoid court, which is what I think they were after, right? They didn't want this drug into court. They didn't want to have to drag in Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham and some of these others in to testify and such. But I mean, they avoided it. But yeah, it's cost them a lot of money here, and they've got a pending lawsuit with Smartmatic coming up too. We'll talk about that in a second. But Phil, what's your take on this lawsuit?
Well, so I agree with you completely because this getting into court would have literally been one of the worst things that could have happened to Fox News. I mean, the case appeared to be pretty strong according to a lot of different legal opinions that I heard. In Fox News, in this case, the less attention they get around this, the better, right? So the trial had actually started. They had convened on, what was it, either Monday or Tuesday morning, and going through, they went into a recess about 3 hours in, and then never emerged, and that's when we got word of the settlement. So I think, Fox News, obviously, regardless of the dollar amount, got the best out of this that they could possibly hope for. Because keep in mind, the other part of this is that if they had gone through and summary judgment had already been awarded, basically that's the equivalent of the judge saying, yep, Fox, we already know you're guilty. It's just time to get in front of a panel to decide the dollar amount. So it was not looking good. The biggest thing around this is that they've got other pending suits, right? So they've got, you mentioned Smartmatic. A Smartmatic lawyer released a statement basically saying, we will settle for nothing less than $787.5 million and a full admission on air of what they have been doing, right? And so this could be another one coming right down the pipe that is very damning and very damaging to Fox News. They've also got the shareholder suit. That is shareholders that feel like Fox News violated its fiduciary responsibility. And if people don't understand what that is, it's basically that public companies have to do what's in their shareholders' best interest. And so there's a suit from several shareholders that teamed up together saying that Fox News violated their fiduciary duty and did not do what was best in the long term for the share price.
Yeah, something that I thought was kind of interesting about the money surrounding this whole case. it's estimated that in December of 2022, so just a few months ago, really 4 or 5 months ago, Fox had about $4 billion in cash. Now, they say 787.5 million ton of money. There is some speculation out there though that Fox can actually bring this cost down through some tax deductions and insurance. And there was a tax professor at Columbia, Robert Williams, who estimates that when this is all said and done, may pay only around 590 million, and maybe less because they could be insured on top of all that. So I mean, but even, you know what, 590 million, 500 million, whatever. It's a lot of money. But again, as you said earlier, right, the good news is they avoided court. They didn't have to do any big formal on-air apologies. I think there was kind of a mention of, well, there was the other night, and don't quote me on this, but they said something to the effect of, some information may have been put out that was incorrect, something like that. But they didn't come out and do a big formal apology. But you mentioned the Smartmatic lawsuit. I mean, you just said it. They're not going to settle for anything less than what Dominion settled for. And I mean, quite honestly, I don't blame them. I mean, Dominion kind of set the precedence for this. And if Smartmatic feels they've got a strong case, which they feel they do, they're suing right now for 2.7 billion. Why should they settle for anything less than 787.5 million? I mean, when it's all said and done. So, kind of the same cast of characters in the Smartmatic lawsuit. Lou Dobbs, Maria Bartiromo, Janine Pirro. I always butcher her last name too. I always just think of her as Janine, but Trump, Giuliani, Sidney Powell, a whole host of them, kind of the same characters that we had in this Dominion settlement here this past week.
Yeah, and we're finding guilt in other places too. I mean, this, we found out about that early in the week, and then like the next day, we find out that Mike Lindell is going to end up paying $5 million in a lawsuit that basically involved him coming out and saying that if anybody could disprove his election theory, crazy election theories, that he would pay them $5 million, and then somebody disproved them all,
You,
and he refused to pay, and so they sued the shit out of him, and now they're getting the $5 million.
you know what's funny about that? Actually, what I heard was the guy who was awarded the 5 million from Lindell. He actually started out that whole thing with, hey, let me, agreeing with Lindell, thinking, everything was bad or wrong with the election. He's like, let me just see what all kind of great information he's got. And he wanted to like back the guy up, and then discovered that there wasn't anything there. And then ultimately he's like, you know what? I think I can actually prove this guy wrong. And voila, now he's $5 million or so richer.
Yeah, so I had not heard that piece of it, but that makes it even more, and this is, like I said, related in the case that Mike Lindell was all over a lot of these TV shows. And not to mention, Fox News is not the only one here. You mentioned the $4 million of cash on hand. I had heard 8 at one point. I think largely those numbers are all speculative because I don't think anybody actually knows. They've probably got something of an idea based on last year's public disclosures, but they don't know where it's gone since then. So a lot of that's kind of speculation. The other thing is that Newsmax and OAN are also getting sued by both of these voting machine companies. And they are not the kind of corporate big powerhouses that Fox News is. And so that's going to greatly affect the media environment when these suits get through Fox and turn over to the smaller outlets, right?
I
And
Hadn't One America News already been in financial trouble? I mean, weren't they the one that was dropped by Verizon? I believe that was One America News, wasn't it?
yeah, it was either Verizon or AT&T, and so they're already struggling, and this is most certainly probably going to put them under. But again, all these cases getting tied up, this moves kind of slowly, so we won't see any real. I mean, people are speculating that we're not going to see the Smartmatic thing roll out until late summer, early fall.
I heard
And that's just with Fox too.
I heard the Smartmatic. What I heard was 2025 on Smartmatic. But I mean,
Yeah, I don't know that it's going to be that. I don't know that it's going to be that far, but we'll see. I
mean
don't know these things.
that's what I heard the other day. But regardless, it's not going to happen this week or next week. It's going to be down the road sometime. Whether it's late 23 or extends as far as early 2025. It's going to take us a bit, I think, to get through all this. And then, as you mentioned, in the case of One American News and Newsmax, what happens to those networks. As I said, I believe it's One American News. It's already had some financial troubles being dropped by some carriers. I'm not sure on the financial status of Newsmax right now. I haven't really checked on that, but yeah, I mean, a big lawsuit could, as you mentioned, do a small network like that in. Definitely news here, but again, I don't see
And
any. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, I heard one other interesting take on this too. And if we were just gonna just refocus from a different angle, one of the things that I heard a perspective on this, which was that the people who watch Fox News largely don't care what the facts are about, and so this doesn't really stand to hurt them with their consumers at all. A lot of these people, especially the further to the right that they get, live in an environment where they will say something or believe something that is untrue, and then you can prove it to them, and then they'll just say, "Well, at the end of the day, I don't care," And so I think the one advantage Fox News does is that its loyalists largely don't take full representation of the facts or what is really going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the age of the internet, right? Everybody can Google something and find a story that agrees with their viewpoint, etc. But speaking of Fox News, this whole lawsuit isn't the only thing that's got them in the news. Actually, earlier today it broke that their big time host, Mr. Tucker Carlson, is no longer employed there. Now, let me just say this: all I read was they have parted ways. There's a lot of speculation out there about what happened. I have my theories on this. Phil, what do you think happened between Tucker Carlson and Fox?
Yeah, so it really, again, the statement that they put out said it was a mutual agreement. Typically, anytime they have to put out a statement, regardless of what words they use and what flowery language they use, it means somebody got fired. You see this all the time in the sports world with coaches, right? It's a mutual agreement for what's best for the franchise, and then the coach is no longer there. I would say, based on the fact that Friday night show Tucker Carlson signed off, will be back on Monday, meant that it was a little bit of a surprise to Tucker when he showed up to the office today.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think it was a firing. I think if one of the big things is you just said it last Friday night, he made it sound like he would be right back on Monday. Again, Tucker Carlson, I mean, say what you want about him pushing the envelope, whatever. I think Fox, yeah, I think they made a decision to part ways with him. And again, let me point out, he was their most viewed, or his program was the most viewed on Fox News. So they essentially parted ways with, whether it was a firing or they mutually agreed or whatever. But essentially, they are no longer employing the guy who had their highest rated show. And apparently there's going to be a host of people kind of just guest hosting in that spot. I say guest hosting, just some kind of like evening news program until they can figure out who's going to host it and what they're going to do going forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, is this Fox News's version of trying to find the follow on for Alex Trebek? I'm not quite sure. I don't know if you remember, but Jeopardy went through
Yeah.
probably like
Well,
16 different hosts of the show, but that's
well,
kind of what it sounds like. Is that they're going to have a rotating crew of other Fox News hosts on the program.
I mean, I could always jump on there. Fox News, I suppose, needs someone. They can, they could reach out. I could probably help them out a bit. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Tucker Carlson's gone. He is not the only news person that is now gone. We found out today, I mean, shortly after the Tucker Carlson news broke, then I find out Don Lemon on CNN has been fired. Now, they did say he's been fired. So I guess Don Lemon, I guess it was just kind of a hostile work environment from what I read. I mean, some of the people that worked with him said he was making sexist remarks and just was in general not a very fun guy to be around. And so I guess CNN had enough of him after 17 years and he's now gone also. So some definite shakeup in the newsrooms.
Yeah, I mean, Don Lemon apparently pulled a Bill O'Reilly and got himself removed from the job. But before we move on, what do you think Fox News' strategy was with this high profile dismissal?
Well, if they really fired him, what I think they may be doing is they're maybe trying to ultimately clean up a little bit and say, hey, we can't, if you push the envelope a little too far. And I think that may be what had happened, was is Fox saying, hey, enough's enough. The question now I have is, do we see other people like, Maria Bartiromo, possibly Janine Pirro, some of these other ones going away that are in these lawsuits? I don't know. I mean, it is worth mentioning. Lou Dobbs has been off Fox News now for, gosh, I don't know, a year and a half or something like that. It looks that way now. Again, I don't know. That's pure speculation on my part. I mean, that's the other question. Do they go after other hosts on that network, Phil, or is this going to stop with Tucker Carlson?
Well, I definitely think there's other hosts that are in question and that are going to have trouble. I think especially more so if they are involved in this lawsuit. I don't know if the two are 100% connected, but it does seem, you say pushing the envelope. I see it as more as like lighting it on fire. But what's next for Tucker? Does Tucker end up going? Is this the next evening News Nation or CNN host, or do we see him more like we see sketchy Infowars style YouTube channel sort of news reporting? What do you think?
So I think he goes along the lines of Steve Bannon. I don't see CNN hiring him. I don't think News Nation is big enough to pay him what he would want. So I think he goes along the route of a Steve Bannon type podcast, his own little kind of a network thing. That's the route I see him going. I mean, let's not forget he's already worked for CNN, and if I'm not mistaken, he worked for MSNBC for a few years also. So he's kind of made the rounds already on these mainstream networks. I think he goes the route of more like a Steve Bannon. He's not going to disappear, but I think that's the route he goes.
Yeah.
So
Okay. And then moving on from that, what do we got this a lot of swirling around this mifepristone abortion pill ruling. What's your take as of right now?
Well, Friday, the Supreme Court, let's just put this out, halted the restrictions to it. But, this, it's worth noting, it's now that fight around this pill, and it goes back to the lower courts. I mean, quite honestly, we could see this back at the Supreme Court in some months from now. It just is going to, I think, continue to swirl. I mean, let's be fair. We talked about this whole thing at length last week, but I mean, again, it's abortion that is just blowing up in the headlines, and it is continuing to be one of the hottest items in the political environment here in the United States. Abortion groups last week saw this as a win for them, but you see some pushing back. I mean, some hardline conservatives are pushing back against it. Mike Pence, who himself may be possibly mulling a presidential run, said if it was up to him, he'd just ban it, and said he wants to continue pushing down the abortion restrictions. Him and Donald Trump have been kind of going back on their abortion positions lately. So yeah, I mean, this is just continues to be a hot button item, and it's part of a saga we will see next year in the 2024 election. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, and again, we don't have to hit every detail that we hit last week, but there's a couple things on here that I think are really interesting. So it goes back down to the Fifth Circuit, right? And the Fifth Circuit is in this case notably conservative. And so just as you mentioned, I've heard like 3 or 4 legal analysts say that this is basically going to be back within the next year. It's going to be back at the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court appears to be doing is not trying to really kick the can down the road. They're just trying to kick the can away, and not have to deal with it in the future. But they didn't get that result. They sent it back to the Fifth Circuit, hoping that probably it would go away, and it doesn't look like it is. What I also think is disturbing about this is I've heard more. I brought it up briefly that how a judge gets to decide what a Congress mandated government organization can do or does do, and I think that's really dangerous territory. But there were a couple people that I listened to that said, this could be really dangerous for all kinds of different things that we don't think about that the FDA does for us on a regular basis, right? And by stripping the FDA's power through the courts, they could essentially make the food that we eat much more unsafe. They could, other medications could be on the line with this. There's all kinds of different things that they could go after based on a precedent if this precedent gets set by the Supreme Court. It'll be interesting to see the fallout of this, and I think that this is gonna, at the end of the day, hurt Republicans. It's also a bad sign because it just shows clearly that conservative ideals are not in line with their constituents, especially in this issue, if not more issues. Who knows where this one's going to go?
I mean, I'll just say to your point. I mean, I think this is an issue. I will agree with you that conservatives are out of line with the average everyday voter. I disagree with you that it's all issues, but I think this issue, I agree with you, as I have on many episodes, which is why I just say again, if you're running for office, right? I mean, you got to read the room. And when I say read the room, look around the country. I'll say it again. Ruby Red, Kansas overwhelmingly voted to keep abortion legal in their state, right? And there's been some other ones. I think I heard this earlier today, and it makes sense when I started thinking about it. Every time abortion rights have been put on the bill, on the voting block, I should say, in these states, right? It's won, right? Reproductive rights, abortion rights, whatever, have won. And now it hasn't gone on ballot in every state, but the ones it has, including Kansas, it has. So this is not an issue that's going well. There are a number of Republicans that I think just want it to go away. I mean, Lindsey Graham was obviously not very happy trying to talk about it yesterday on CNN on Sunday morning with Dana Bash. He was not didn't seem comfortable and kind of wanted to skirt the issue and got pretty upset at her. And Dana Bash, to her credit, right, remained calm and reeled him back into the discussion. But yeah, it's an issue right now that, I mean, again, we're going to keep hearing it and hearing it and hearing it. And my kind of parting take on this is, again, this is going to really impact next year's election. So
yeah, and we even talked about it last week with with DeSantis and the 6 week ban, and then also the other Republican candidate, what's his name, getting asked the question.
Tim Scott.
Tim Scott getting asked the question, just completely fumbling over it. It's not a good spot to be in where a lot of these people are at right now. And I think it is going to come around to punish them in 2024. It's kind of, we go all the way back to this Supreme Court ruling. I initially said it's gonna screw them up in the short term, and you said it's gonna screw them up in the long term. And I think both of us were right in this case, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. I definitely would. So we'll continue to watch abortion be in the news, I think, almost every week as we build up into 2024, and quite honestly beyond. So speaking of news, some more news. We've got the debt ceiling that's heating up. The Republicans put a plan out this past week saying they've got a plan to raise the debt ceiling and cut spending, and they're calling it the Limit Save Grow Act. There's some details on this one here, but yeah, I mean, they essentially cut spending down to FY22 levels, and there's some other details to it. Phil, what do you got on this?
Well, I got a couple things. So before we get into the kind of ideological, battle that's going on with this potentially, I mean, they listed a bunch of areas that they want cuts. Of course, entitlements are always on there because that's a big thing that Republicans don't like and Democrats, think are necessary. But also on there is education, right? So major cuts to education. There's cuts to veteran services and the VA. There's also cuts to a lot of things that, we saw a rollback on the Inflation Reduction Act. But notably, one of the interesting details that I found is that, there was some stats that came about this Inflation Reduction Act rollback that just shows that in Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, the 14th of Georgia, it would cut $2.5 billion in manufacturing. Barry Loudermilk's district in Georgia, he has $2.5 billion in solar manufacturing and $4.5 billion in battery manufacturing. other ones, Drew Ferguson of Georgia is 2.6 billion. Joe Wilson of South Carolina is 2 billion. Ralph Norman of South Carolina is 1.3 billion. Mark Green of Tennessee is 3.2 billion, and Mike Carey 3.5 billion. Andy Biggs of Arizona 5.5 billion in battery manufacturing. And so clearly they're not doing this out of concern for jobs and manufacturing industries, because part of this rollback would cut projects that are already started in those states.
Well, maybe started. I've also heard barely started, and what that report I think fails to mention is there's been deep cuts to the energy sector. So while they're, and when I say energy, maybe the oil and some of these others. So you had a lot of people out of work in some of these other sectors that we're now beginning possibly to see work in manufacturing. I also don't know that the batteries. I know there's been a lot of fallout about that whole battery manufacturing. I know Manchin's been pretty upset about that with the Inflation Reduction Act, saying we haven't gotten them all the way made here ashore in the United States. But regardless, right there, that is a part of it. Rolling back things to that. There's also, I hadn't heard anything on the education piece. I know blocked student loan forgiveness plan, IRS money, work requirements to safety net programs. It says able-bodied single people have got to work 20 hours a week, or they will only get food stamps for 3 months out of the year. And I think it's kind of interesting. I don't see a problem with that. Representative Dusty Johnson of South Dakota, himself a product of federal assistance. As a child, he talks about that in his story, how he grew up in poverty and parents were on federal assistance. He said these work requirements do help people get back on their feet. Um, so, and that's kind of my thing, right? You should work to get off federal assistance, I think. Phil, you mentioned repealing green energy tax credits. Something else is rescinding the unobligated COVID-19 relief funds. There's a whole bunch to this, right? The VA, you talked about it. I don't know what the VA cuts will be. I've seen some speculations on it. I personally would like to see some cuts to the VA, mainly in a lot of the bureaucracy at the top. But ultimately, right, there's a lot to this plan. Now, people like on my side of the fence probably like more things in this than you do, right? And people on your side are naturally going to probably, or I shouldn't say naturally, but likely be opposed to many of these things. But here's what I'll say. Regardless if the Republicans get through this through the House, and I want to add this, by the way, there's no guarantee this gets through the House. Now, McCarthy's saying he thinks he's got the votes. I'm reading he may not, because there are a number of people, I shouldn't say a number, but there are a handful of Republican holdouts who are saying this doesn't go far enough. I want to see more cuts. So there's no guarantee it even gets through the House. But if it does, it's most certainly to die in the Senate. Nothing else. Biden would veto it. But what I think McCarthy's doing here is he's trying to play ball, to put out something to get the White House in negotiations on this. So that's where I think McCarthy's trying to go with this. I think even he knows this isn't going to go anywhere, but he's trying to put some, albeit maybe a kind of a far right plan, but he's putting it out on the table to try and get the White House to come to dealings on this one.
Yeah, and so I don't obviously the one thing in here that I think is absolutely absurd is the cuts to education, right? And I think if anything, we need to spend more on education. The problem is that the only reason the Republicans are trying to pick this fight, and McCarthy's trying to pick this fight, is because I don't honestly understand why any person, Republican or Democrat, would be against finding money and finding ways to research and develop making the planet safer for our children. I just don't get that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you don't believe that climate change exists or anything, and that these weather patterns are just changing because it's a natural occurrence. I don't understand that. So I don't get going after things like that. But I also don't understand why they have no problem doing it when they are not in power. When they are in power, it's a non-starter, right? There's clips quickly came out after the fact of Donald Trump talking about it under the last administration. Nobody, even the Democrats who weren't happy with that administration, didn't put up any roadblocks. They raised the debt ceiling twice. Look, a lot of this money that is getting wrapped up into this, and the reason why they need to raise it is $7.2 trillion that was spent under the last administration, and 2.1 that was spent under this administration, which was largely focused at recovering portions of the economy and keeping people safe and in good welfare as we wrapped up COVID. You know,
So So I will just add, I wasn't a fan of the spending there. I'm a pretty fiscally conservative guy who wasn't a fan of the big spending in the Trump era, and some, or I should say, the tax cuts. Right, all that debt that just starts accumulating. I wasn't a big fan of that. I like to see, like I said, if I see an opportunity to cut back on wasteful spending, I'm all for it, and I see there being plenty of opportunities in here that I'm definitely in favor of, and
yeah,
so.
and the data is starting to trickle in. So going back to the IRS thing too, the data is starting to trickle in that the IRS, because of beefed up kind of auditors and accountants and stuff like that, is looking. The last report I heard was they're saying they're going to be able to recover over $5 trillion in unpaid or cheated taxes, right? And so I think that I don't understand why we all of a sudden are telling people, or certain news channels and certain Congress people are telling people that the IRS is going to come after the average Joe with guns and an IRS SWAT team. It doesn't make any sense. One, it's not realistic. Two, they've already been coming after the average Joe because the average Joe is paying their taxes. So
So
looking at this figure, this actually, some of these things they're trying to roll back actually saves the US a lot of money over time.
yeah, so I that IRS stuff, I've heard different reports on it. You know, yeah, as far as that goes, I you hire a whole bunch of IRS agents. I'll tell you right now, it makes me and many people uncomfortable. The last thing I want to do is get audited over and over, even though I don't believe I'm hiding anything. But yeah, I mean, it's not a good look. I mean, it doesn't sound good. It's been a very good talking point for Republicans. And let me say this: at the end of the day, this is the people's house that has put this bill forward. This is who we have elected and put in place in our House of Representatives. And this is the bill they've come forward with. And I think the White House needs to sit down and have some talks. And I will tell you, I am not the only person that's saying that. There are Democrats that are saying the same thing too. That the president needs to sit down. At the end of the day, the United States has elected the Republicans to be in charge of the House, and I think sit down and start negotiating. Right? Come up with some cuts that could be favorable to both sides. Again, you and I are going to disagree on many of these things, right? But like I said, I think ultimately the sign of a good functional government is for people to be able to sit down and to get some compromise out there. And I think that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, not on this one. I think the US has racked up a bill, you pay the bill, and then you work it through the budgeting process moving forward. This isn't the time or place to have negotiations, and I'll tell you, based on President Biden's experience, I doubt he's going to have any negotiations. Regardless of what the consequences may perceive to be, he's not going to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think that's very, very unfortunate. I think that's only going to hurt him. And I will tell you, I'll just say this before we transition. My opinion, I think a default would be absolutely catastrophic for him. So,
Well, it's not just him. It'll be absolutely catastrophic for all Americans.
yeah, but what I'm saying
Um,
is I think he would take the heat probably harder than anyone on that one. So I think he should sit down, and I think he's making a real mistake not to sit down and at least have a conversation. And there are members of his own party that are saying the same thing. So again,
Yeah, but don't you? So here's the only thing, and we had bitched about this, so I won't keep stomping this into it. But he got to witness this under Obama, because the first time this came up under the Obama administration, Obama did try and work with it, and it got so close to the wire. They downgraded our credit rating. All these things happened. And Obama just knew the second time he just wasn't going to deal with it. He's like, I'm not doing that. And so the second time it came up, he refused to negotiate, and we came out of it with a clean debt-free increase. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
okay, again, you and I'll disagree on this. I think the president needs to sit down, and I think ultimately he will. at least have a conversation. I think that's my thing. At least have a conversation. But there are some people that are talking about this debt ceiling, and when I say people, people from each side of the aisle, specifically the Problem Solvers Caucus, and we've talked about them quite a bit on this show in the past. This bipartisan, group in the House, Republicans and Democrats that are moderate, centrist, whatever, that try and find common ground, and they're working on a plan for the debt ceiling. They came out with something this past Wednesday. It's an alternative to this Republican plan. Notably, they'll suspend the debt ceiling through December of 23. They want to propose a fiscal commission to review and recommend a package to stabilize debt. And there are a few other things that they put out with this plan, but it was kind of vague, I will say that. But ultimately, what they're doing and what they're saying is they want to take these steps to bring compromise and potentially bring the country back together. And there's been a number of centrists, et cetera, that have kind of applauded this move. We've seen in the past senators like Joe Manchin, Mitt Romney. They've discussed possibly a bipartisan rescue committee. And it kind of looks like this problem solvers group is trying to be the adults at the table, Phil, and try and put something together. They've done it in the past. They're known to work well together. Yeah, what do you take? What's your take on the problem solvers at least trying to work through something here?
Well, I think it's good, and I'll be honest with you. There's a couple of different ideas that I like. Is we don't find ourselves in the argument of whether to or not to raise the debt limit, right? It really needs to be considered as just something that has to happen, right? McCarthy's analysis and kind of comparison that it's like giving a kid a credit card. It's not, right. And it's not anywhere near that, right? These are bills that are already incurred. It's more about the kid already had the credit card and now it's time to pay the bill, right? And you don't have a choice. And so I like this process that the problem solvers are putting forward because it gets it done cleanly, and it puts it out past an election, which is important because this doesn't need to be caught up in what we're focused on for the election. And two, it employs congressmen and women to get together, do some fucking work, and get a budget passed. And I like I said, I think that's the process by which this should be happening is balance the budget, right? You and I have to do it every day. And most people do. And so we want our, officials to do the same thing with the Treasury.
Yeah, so I will talk a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of this thing. So to get out of the problem solvers caucus, they need 3/4 of that group to buy off on it to go forward. Then the question is, would it pass the House? I mean, I don't know. I mean, how strong the moderates are in that House and how much they can sway their respective sides of the aisle. I will tell you, the two co-chairs of this committee, the Democrat Josh Gottheimer and the Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, I'll be honest with you, they both seem to be pretty well liked by their respective parties. And I'll be honest with you, at least in the case of Gottheimer, there's a number of Republicans that say positive things about him. And I've heard a number of Democrats, to be fair, say positive things about the co-chair Brian Fitzpatrick, the Republican. So they definitely do have an impact there. The question is, right, I mean, can they get this thing all the way together? I don't know, but here's the thing. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again on here. I tip my hat to these guys. I definitely respect this whole problem solvers caucus because ultimately, these members have all said they want to be a part of this because they want to make a difference and they're tired of the partisan yelling, etc. Where can we find common ground, and where can we get our government back on its feet and working again? And ultimately, I've got to give them some props on that, and I think you would as well, Phil.
Yeah, no, and I do. I think that this is it. Like, at least, even if I may not agree with all of them or some of the things that they're doing, at least they are trying to make progress, right, and get something done. And I think that a lot of people use the word progressive as in somebody who has these vast, far-reaching liberal ideas, but really progressives just want progress. And so I think that that's good at the end of the day. The one thing I will say is that I think while being well liked and easy to get along with, members of Congress, I do not think that they hold the power or kind of wield the same blade that they used to, because McCarthy, in his bid to gain speakership, had given a ton of power to the Jim Jordans, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the other people who are far right and almost just want to see everything burnt down.
Yeah, but let's not forget, right, that ultimately you've got people, these very co-chairs, right, Fitzpatrick and Gottheimer. They may already look at the far left and right as, hey, I'm probably not reaching them, but there's still plenty of people that I think they can reach. The Don Bacon's, well, actually, to be fair, Don Bacon is on the Problem Solvers Caucus, but there are several others, and so you're right. They may not have quite the power they did some years back. I still think they've got some influence, and it's interesting. I've listened to Gottheimer and Fitzpatrick in interviews. They do interviews together quite a bit, and it's interesting to hear the two of them talk. And they both, in one of the interviews I heard, they both agreed that it is not easy doing what they do, because they're like, ultimately we roll our sleeves up and go to work. And they're like, we're not out there trying to get social media views and all this other stuff. And they're like, there are plenty of days where people on, their respective parties are upset at them for work, even trying to work across the aisle. But they're like, you know what, we let it is what it is. And Fitzpatrick has said, I'm a proud Republican. Gottheimer said, I'm a proud Democrat. And they both respect each other for that. So again, I think this is a positive thing. Let's hope they can continue moving forward on this, Phil. And yeah, I mean, we'll see going forward. But with that being said, unless you've got anything else in the problem solvers, I'd like to turn to some election news to start with the President Biden.
Yeah, so it's largely speculated now that Biden is going to announce that he is running for president. There's some ideas around, they're trying to get it to coincide with a similar date when he threw out his name for 2020. What I think we're thinking that it's going to happen the day that this airs, right? Tuesday.
Yeah, I've heard some speculation. I've also heard that it could be pushed off, but I think as time, has passed here the last few days, I think it's looking more and more like it's going to be this week that he is going to officially announce. Although I think we've all kind of known this is coming. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting for him. There are some numbers out there that don't look good for him right now. Less than half of Democrats think he should run again, right? 47%. That came out of the Associated Press. And they say nationwide, only 26% of Americans want him to run again. But I will say this: he's got a 78% approval rating amongst Democrats, and 81% of Democrats said that if it comes down to it and he is the candidate, they would support him. 41% of that is a definite, 40% likely. So he's definitely got the Democrats on his side, but he seems to still be hampered by those low approval ratings, right? I mean, he's still sitting in the low 40s. Some people are pointing to his age. He would be 82 when he would be sworn in for his second term, 86 at the end of it. So, I mean, he's got some numbers here that he's got to work with. He's got to win over those independents and soft Republicans to win re-election. And I heard a couple of interesting stats here, and I'll before I turn it over to you, Phil. 20% of the country considers themselves very conservative. 13% consider themselves very liberal. 67% consider themselves in the moderate or middle of the road faction. Right, that's according to a poll that I heard on NPR this weekend. And so that's kind of interesting in the sense that that's 67% are saying they're in the middle. Now, to be fair, of that 67%, there are probably a good percentage of them that either lean right or left. I'll say that. But still, there's a lot of people in that moderate middle that I think he's got to win over. And one more interesting stat for you. I heard this on MSNBC this morning. In a poll, a generic Republican beats Biden over and over and over again. And I didn't see the margins put up, but what they said on MSNBC was he is beaten by a generic Republican by a good number, pretty high. However, if you take that same hypothetical poll and throw it out there with Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, he beats Trump. So I mean, and right now, I mean, we could, yeah, Trump is pulling ahead in those polls. So anyway, I just said a whole mouthful. Phil, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my comment. Is that the problem is he's not going to run against a generic Republican, right? And so again, we've talked about this dilemma, but there is no way that DeSantis, Haley, throw in any other name, are going to bring that 1 to 2 to 4% that they're currently holding up to the level it's going to need to win a winner takes all race. It's just not going to happen. And so now we know that that Trump's numbers, that he could theoretically run from a prison cell. So, however that looks, it's just not going to be probably a good outcome for the Republicans. Whether the outcome is another 4 years of Trump, or the outcome is Trump running against Biden, probably going to lose. Whichever the case is, it's not going to be the outcome that a majority of Americans want.
Yeah,
I agree with you, right? I think Joe Biden has done a hell of a job. If you just look at the sheer numbers of legislation passed, he's the most successful president in a really long time. And again, like it or hate the policy, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, just by the numbers, right? He's extremely successful. The one thing I will say is that, yeah, while I think he's done a great job, I don't want a dude that's in his 80s as the president, right? A good majority of Grandpa Joe's criticism just comes from the fact that he's old, right? It's like people love to kill him in the news, and we know, and we've known for 60 years that he had a stuttering problem. You know what I mean? And now he's just really old and has a stuttering problem. So it's not great. But you know what? I'm willing to take it if it's 4 more years of not Trump.
so here's a couple things I'll just say here before we move on. You mentioned Trump and his polls. So a poll I heard this weekend has Trump 46%, or he's got 46%, DeSantis 31%, Pence 6%, and then everybody else, the Tim Scotts, et cetera, are down in the 2 and 3% range. So the one person that is somewhat close to him in these primary polls seems to be Ron DeSantis. However, there's two things there. One, his numbers are slipping a bit, and two, DeSantis hasn't even declared himself a candidate. And as time goes on, I'm starting to sit here and wonder if maybe Ron DeSantis isn't going to stay away and just say, you know what, you guys go fight this thing out. I'm young enough. I think he's in his mid 40s. He's young enough to just come back again at a later election. So there's that, right? Ultimately, though, it looks as he slips. Trump's, quite likely the guy. The other thing I was going to say, though, is that around the nation, there just seems to be people all over the place are saying, you know what, I'd rather there be fresh faces besides Biden and Trump on this ballot. Can we get some other people? But it doesn't look like it's going to be that way, because it looks like 2024 is going to be Biden versus Trump again.
Yeah, yeah. I still think that there's always the possibility that a third party candidate could come in and actually spoil it. Now, which way does that get spoiled? We don't know. I can speculate, but I'm not going to do that on here because I don't want to make a outlandish prediction that's going to come back and bite me later. Maybe weeks, months, something down the road, we'll see. And I'll be honest with you, we've talked about it before. I don't think DeSantis has it on the national stage. He's not particularly sociable. He's not particularly good in front of a camera. I just don't think he's going to be able to make it.
Yeah, well, and again, his numbers are kind of slipping as we see it here, Phil. But
It's all that tiny D talk,
yeah,
that Trump is having.
he's got all kinds of names for him. But we do have some other election news here, quick before we turn this over. Looks like Tammy Baldwin. This one happened a little over a week ago now. She has announced that she is going to seek another term in the Senate. So Tammy Baldwin being senator out of Wisconsin. So there's that going on there. I don't know who's going to run against her in Wisconsin, Phil, but that's That seems to be one of those kind of purple states that is usually very close as far as their elections go. So, I mean, whoever it is, Tammy Baldwin is probably going to face a fight again, like she has in the past. So we'll see. I mean, Phil, have you heard anything about Baldwin or any possible challenges for her? Challengers for her, I should say.
My actual prediction is that Doctor Oz is going to buy a home in Racine, and attempt that one as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to go there. I think there's enough good Republican candidates in the state of Wisconsin that I think we'll find one to give Baldwin a run for her money. But I'll switch to West Virginia here. And again, this one is not anything official that I've heard just yet. But some episodes back, I made mention of Jim Justice out there in West Virginia, and there were some whisperings in the past that he was possibly going to throw his name in the hat for the West Virginia Senate race. Now, Justice being the Republican governor there, now he is, let's be fair, the sometimes Republican, sometimes Democrat, now back to being a Republican again. He's kind of gone all over the place with his political affiliations over the years, but it looks like he is likely going to announce that he's going to jump in the ring for that Senate race, possibly even this week, trying to win that seat that Joe Manchin currently holds there in West Virginia. You've heard me say this before. Joe Manchin is probably the only Democrat that can win in West Virginia in a national election, or in a statewide election, I should say. If Justice gets in there, he again, given the fact that in West Virginia he's been pretty popular, I think he gives Manchin a real run for his money. And I don't honestly know if Joe Manchin is even going to seek re-election as a senator. He hasn't said one way or the other yet. And whenever he's on a Sunday morning talk show, and by the way, he's on those shows all the time, he gets asked by Chuck Todd and all the other Sunday morning hosts what his plans are, and he really dodges that question. So yeah, I mean, Phil, I mean, is Justice going to be Jim Justice going to be that next senator out of West Virginia?
Yeah, probably. I think Manchin's going to try and run for president.
Okay, well, I think that we'll
I mean,
we'll
you
say
say he dodges that question pretty well. I mean, he pretty much said on Meet the Press that he's going to run for president.
yeah, but well, I should say he dodges the question when asked about whether he's going to seek another term as a senator in West Virginia. Right. That's what I see him always kind of dodge that one around. I've heard him drop hints about the possible White House, bid or whatever, but we can probably discuss that on another show, especially if he actually does come out and jump in. But I will say there is one more presidential guy running, and that is conservative talk radio host Larry Elder has announced he's jumping in the ring for the GOP nomination in 2024. Mr. Elder was a guy who challenged Gavin Newsom, governor of California, in that recall here sometime back. I think he lost by like 20 points.
Yeah, what a loser. And I'm not disparaging him. I'm just saying he lost by a ton. They were able out there in California to get enough petition signatures to try and do a special election against Gavin Newsom. And you're right, he got beat by like 20 plus points. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Elder is facing a very tough climb, but he did throw his name in there. He's made some controversial remarks in the past. Again, all you got to do is Google Larry Elder, and I'm sure you can pull those up. But I just wanted to mention that he had thrown his name in there also. So that covers our election news and our topics for the week. Phil, I think it's been another great episode as we get ready to wrap up here. What do you got as we end here?
Well, before we get on to parting shots, I just want to say thank you all for listening. We appreciate your support week in, week out. Please go to pocketpolitics.co. Go to our social medias from there. Like, subscribe, hit all the buttons. You know which ones they are. And we greatly appreciate that interaction. If there's ever something you want to hear us talk about, reach out to us. You can do that on social media or our email, cameronandphill@gmail.com. And we will be happy to talk about the issues that you have in mind in the political world. Cam, parting shots?
Yeah, so this week mine is a little sad here. So I am going to go to the state of Utah for this one. And Ken Potts, one of the last two remaining survivors of the USS Arizona battleship, which was sank during Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, has just died. All right. He was 102 years old. And again, he was living in Provo, Utah when this happened. That had been his home for many, many years out there, a home that he had shared for a long time with his wife of 66 years. So, but yeah, with the passing of Mr. Potts, there now is only one remaining survivor of the USS Arizona battleship. And so I just want to say this, ladies and gentlemen, certainly rest in peace to Mr. Potts. But I'll also say this: I mean, that is a piece of history that is just almost now gone. Those that were, there on the Arizona and survived it. And I'll be honest with you, our World War II veterans, and certainly those that were at the attack on Pearl Harbor, they are all just dying at a rapid pace, and that generation is quickly vanishing, and with it will go a lot of great eyewitness accounts to history. So again, rest in peace to Mr. Potts, and thank you for your service so many years ago out there in World War II. Phil, what do you got?
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about this SpaceX rocket. I don't know how many people saw it or if it was that. Um, I saw it on a lot of feeds, news wise, YouTube, social media, etc. But basically, SpaceX launches this rocket, gets about 4 minutes into the flight, everything looks successful, and then right as the kind of video feed contributor says, "This is the icing on the cake," it bursts into a giant explosion, flames and such. Luckily, it was unmanned, so nobody was injured. But I thought the reaction was a little weird. Everybody in the ground control center kind of cheering like it was a success or something. And this makes me question. Again, we can go back to Elon Musk's fitness to run an organization like this. I mean, I saw some commentators say things such as this, Elon Musk's latest rocket pulled a Tesla, joking about, his other vehicles that he seems to make that catch on fire, it with no notice. And then, it's just people comparing this to kind of Twitter similarly going down in flames. Granted, it's the slow burn, but just kind of interesting that they would, that the culture behind that would treat this as a success. Keep in mind, this wasn't contracted. So he was not getting paid or subsidized by NASA or anybody else to do this. So he's at this point just burning up rocket ships, for for whatever reason. I don't know. I mean, and then it also caused rocket ship debris to rain down in a bird sanctuary, a migrant bird sanctuary in the Gulf of Mexico. So this makes me kind of ask what's wrong in this world right now that this is going on. But I'll leave that discussion for our listeners and their own thoughts. And that's all I have for this week, Cam. Over to you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. It's been another great episode. We look forward to you interacting with us on social media and certainly continuing your support for us. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time.
All right, bye.